And how do you see the global economic growth in 2022? According to your report for economic forecast that was released a month ago, the global GDP will slow down this year compared to the last year. So what risks and obstacles will we be facing globally this year?
Well, this year, the slowdown is actually more due to a less pronounced base effect. That is, in 2021, the economic growth was built upon a very low statistical number on 2020 because of the disruptions everywhere. But in 2022, it will be based on a rather normal year. So hence the slowdown in percentage terms. But also there are significant risks that will include another variant of COVID-19 that is both transmissive and also lethal. That will cause widespread shuttering of businesses once again and cause disruption to the economic recovery. And also we do expect inflation to be one of the major hindrances. And as we can see, the US inflation has been hitting its highest for some time. And also that will trigger a round of tightening across the world, followed by emerging markets that might risk taper tantrum kind of scenario like we see in 2013 to 2014. And beyond that, we also think that the semiconductor shortage will kind of continue and global supply chain will continue to be disrupted, at least for a very prolonged period of time in 2022 because of the disruption in COVID-19 will kind of sustain. And that will also push the price, consumer price inflation globally, continue to do that in 2022.
Okay, so what do you think of the global supply chain and, of course, the energy crisis, and how will this affect economic growth of developed countries and also emerging countries like Indonesia?
Energy price, we do expect the growth to be rather muted. Not to say it will not grow, but at a much slower pace than it has in 2021, because bulk of the demand has started to be materialized in 2021. But still, an elevated level of energy price will definitely push up inflation and trigger the tightening in advanced economies as well as some emerging economies. For Indonesia specifically, actually a higher energy price will mean a more windfall revenue from the mining and energy export sector itself, which benefit the general economy as well as the public finance, the revenue of the government. But nonetheless, that will also push up consumer price inflation in Indonesia, and again trigger central banks to try to decelerate the growth, and that will bode ill for the general economic recovery as well.
Okay, so specifically about Indonesia, how do you see Indonesia's economic endurance during this year amidst various issues that should become our concerns in 2022?
For Indonesia, one thing I do have to highlight is that the exchange rate volatility is likely to be very high. The Economist Intelligence Unit sees that Indonesia is likely to be the most, one of the country with the most depreciation of its local currency in 2022 because of a relatively high dependency on international capital flow. We expect a rather marked depreciation in the first half of 2022, especially when the investors globally sees the tightening of Federal Reserve, the U.S. Central Bank, to be brought forward again and again. And so that will lead to some capital outflow. And that will prompt Bank Indonesia's subsequent tightening to match the Federal Reserve's tightening, as well as trying to stem the domestic inflationary pressure. That will definitely bode ill for the economic recovery, especially private investment in the years to come as well. And beyond that, I would say is a concern. Currently, the vaccination rate fully vaccination rate remains at only 42-43%, which falls behind many of the regional peers, so that Indonesia might still be vulnerable to COVID-19 induced disruptions. Although we do not expect a blanket lockdown to happen again, any kind of significant economic social restrictions, especially in economically prosperous regions like Jakarta, West Java, will again lead to disruptions in consumption as well as like the production in general.
Okay, so the Indonesian government set the target of the economic growth at 5% this year. So is this possible to be achieved amidst this challenge that we're facing? So how do you forecast our economic growth in this year?
I would say 5% is actually very doable. At the Economist Intelligence Unit, we are forecasting a 5.3% growth in 2022, but that is on the base of like a lower expectation of the 2021 economy performance. So again, I will have to resort to statistics here that the higher growth will actually be based on a very dismal third quarter GDP data in 2021. That because of the disruptions due to the new wave of COVID-19 infections. But like when we try to sort of like generalize, when we try to annualize the growth from 2020 to 2022, it is only like 4.2%, which is pretty much a trend and also a little subpar for Indonesia's growth. But in general, a 5% growth is very much doable, especially when we expect private consumption to become more normal, more or less, due to less disturbance on social restrictions and growing investment as well. Export is also expected to remain strong, although we are not going to see the similar kind of like surge in export in both volume terms and value terms in 2021.
Okay, so what about the inflation? How do you forecast Indonesia's inflation this year? Will it be lift higher like the inflation in developed countries, just like US, UK, and other countries? So is there any specific data to Indonesia's economy this year?
We do expect inflation to grow in 2022. So Asia in general in 2021 has been a very curious case that inflation does not accelerate as it is seen in the other advanced economies in US and the EU. That is partly because the consumer demand is not fully materialized yet. We expect a acceleration of inflation in Indonesia to 3.5% year on year